Welcome to No Free Lunch, Africa's freshest business and tech podcast. With me, your host, Greg Stewart. And today's podcast is focused on the ever-expanding AI landscape and what ethical and security concerns are being raised about its expansion. And my guest today is a seasoned IT executive with over 25 years in the technology sector, who has championed open source innovation tailored to Africa's challenges such as cost-effective cloud migrations and AI ethics in resource-constrained environments. He's a vocal advocate for digital transformation, as well as the regional general manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at Red Hat, Dion Harvey. Welcome to No Free Lunch, Dion.
Greg, thanks for that very flattering introduction. Glad to be here.
Well, it's not often I get to chat to somebody who has had a wide experience within the software industry and has seen lots come in and go in and lots of developments. You've particularly been at the forefront of this whole open source. I think that there's a growing open source perspective in software, and now as AI shapes everything from cloud ops to enterprise strategy, maybe you can tell us a bit about what convinced you that open source is the secret for Africa's tech leap.
You know, I've been in the software industry way too long now, perhaps, and I spent the bulk of it in the world of proprietary software, mostly with American multinationals. I've now been at Red Hat for 10 years. And Red Hat was my primary transition from the world of proprietary software into the world of open source software. And I think there are a couple of things that obviously stand out between the world of proprietary and open source software. You know, I think many of the listeners might be familiar with open source software, but essentially the concept of open source is, one way to describe it would be an engineering philosophy of how to build software using the principles of open source. Because remember, open source is not just about software. There are other elements of technology that benefit from this model. You know, even electric cars, for example. I think Elon Musk is famous for having open sourced some of his electric car technology. But in the world of software, it's a way of building software where the software is available to be edited, to be improved, to be studied, and folks who are participating in that can give back their contributions to that code to make it better. That not only really expands the audience or the field for who can contribute to that software development, but it also means that there are so many more eyes on that software, which means whether it's a bug or malicious code, etc., the model is better at exposing those kinds of issues in software development than may be found in the world of proprietary software. So I think it's a pretty exciting world in terms of how software is built. It also has a bit of a community feel to it, which is nice. It makes software available to the world in a way that can be accessed for free, which of course is a massive boon for Africa. But it also comes with it a different way of thinking about how you work together. It's highly collaborative by nature, right? Because it's about volunteers participating in a way that allows the best idea to win. So I think it's a pretty fantastic model for building things, and in this case, particularly software.
Well, maybe one of the most notable examples of software development was when Mark Shuttleworth went off and created Ubuntu, and that is still developing and working on a completely open source platform today, and has collaborators from all over the globe contributing to developing it, maintaining it, improving it, fixing it, providing better quality software for users for free around the globe.
Yeah, spot on. And, you know, it's a great example because Ubuntu, you know, if you think of the concept of standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, Linux has been around for 25 years plus now, originally started by Linus Torvalds. And the Ubuntu iteration or distribution of that is just one of many distributions of Linux. And Linux,
Yes.
I think, or Linux, as some like to say, really, I think, not only is the poster child, so to speak, of software that benefits from the open source world, but it has it has created so many really powerful distributions of the original concept that I don't even think most people know that it's there.
Yeah.
Android mobile phones are based on Linux code, for example. It's running in people's fridges now. It's kind of everywhere. And that was really, I think, a great example of how the concept of open source really built something that has so dramatically impacted the world. And in more recent times, we saw how, for example, the creation of containers, which is a very, IT geek concept of how do you run your applications in a cloud type world. Once again, open source, and in this case, pioneered and initially engineered by Google, and with code released, became the next wave, especially for corporates, right? Of how to build and run and deploy applications in this sort of cloud world that we're in. And I think AI is going to be the next wave or the next iteration in our industry that's going to embrace the concepts of open source
Yes.
as this whole thing develops.
I can't remember the name of the company, but I actually read an article recently. There's, I think it was one of the American AI startups that specifically is developing a team that is creating a completely open source AI structure. I can't remember what the name of the company was, but their whole
Yeah.
approach was the fact that they believe that these proprietary models that are being developed by the likes of Microsoft and Google
Mm.
and Amazon and so on should not be confined to proprietary usage or development, that it should be open source, because that whole collaborative thing comes into play. Then you got a lot more minds, a lot more expertise, a lot more ability perhaps being
Mm.
focused on its development, and then its availability to other people, providing young, bright-minded developers to be able to take something and develop something new, a new angle on its application and so on. So it definitely has become a trend that I think is an important one, because
I think so.
in my thinking anyway, it makes for better products at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah, and I think the concept of open source is manifesting in so many different ways when it comes to AI, and you just touched on one of them. We're seeing the emergence of open source large language models, and I think you're spot on. By the way, I think there are so many aspects of why open source large language models are a good idea. Once again, going back to the concept of many eyes on the code, so to speak. I believe we're going to get better data security out of them. I think we're going to get better privacy out of them. By definition, they're going to be cheaper to consume because most of these will either be freely available as open source. Some of them may be pay per use, but the development costs will have been lower. The same as things like Linux, there's code transparency. So that is important, especially in this new world of AI where there are some concerns about what it all means. And those are just touching on a few. And by the way, there are some really powerful large language models that are already open source. I mean, Meta has I think Llama 3 is now open source, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken, and there
I
are
think so,
several
yeah.
others. Google has a few, and there are perhaps some lesser known ones, but I think the mainstream models are catching on to this broader definition of why open is good. Another example of why it's a good idea is the compatibility of models with the hardware code, the GPUs. The more open source that is,
Yeah.
the easier it is to build compatibility with with the hardware element of where AI comes into play. So yeah, I think you're right. But there's another element to open source because of course the large language models is just one element of what it means to be building something or building AI. The other side of it is software development and how you integrate the large language model into what it is you're doing. So we're seeing some really cool trends now in the world of AI, like vibe coding, where you could kind of almost use natural language to create code. But everybody, and we're talking especially corporate worlds now here,
Yes.
everybody is coming from some form of legacy code world.
Right.
Think of anything created in the past. The challenge is how do you integrate AI functionality into what you've built before? Well, I think it goes without saying that the more that you've done in that space that is based on the concept of open, the better, right? Because it's simpler, it's more transparent, it's quicker. And the other thing that is, I think, sometimes ignored as a massive factor here, Greg, is the cloud. Sometimes there is a connection between the world of the cloud and what is making AI possible. And if you think of it from the point of view of being a corporate, your data is residing in so many different places now. Some of it might be in the cloud, some of it might be in your own, on your own data centers, for example. Your applications are also running in many different places. So the notion of AI is so tightly coupled to the concept of the world of cloud computing. At Red Hat, we have this philosophy of the open hybrid cloud,
Yes.
meaning that you should have freedom of choice as to what you're putting where, and you should be able to move that around at your will, so to speak, without the fear of lock-in. That's true for the cloud in many ways, and I think as the world of AI gains more and more traction, we're going to see that those philosophies are important, because AI is going to need to touch your data points wherever they are, be that either somebody else's LLM or your proprietary data or a combination thereof. And so I think the world of hybrid cloud and the world of AI are going to be tightly coupled as we move forward in this world of AI, especially for those who are building custom AI capabilities for their business.
Definitely. And the other thing that is really required in terms of AI development is skills development. Let's talk a bit about that whole scenario. I interview some interesting people on my podcast, and one of them recently was a chap by the name of Nick Hudson. You may be aware of him, but Nick is a complete AI skeptic, and says that it's the largest capital misplacement in human history, saying that, and I get his point in that there's so much else we need as mankind in terms of infrastructure, healthcare, and all those sort of things. Why is such a great concentration of investments happening in AI? And it has become a bit of a trend. I was at the AI Expo recently where they were talking about the bubble of AI happening, but underpinning that was the structure, the infrastructure that it has created in terms of energy, in terms of data centers and so on. But underpinning that all, I mean, if AI is to get to the point where it needs to be to perhaps fulfill its projected benefits, one of the greatest needs, I think, is skill development. Chat to us a bit. I know that's part of your philosophy. I know it's part of Red Hat's philosophy as well. Talk to us a bit about that skill development, and what can people in companies, normal business people, be doing in terms of trying to develop that awareness, and is it really going to replace jobs? My firm belief is it has to. There's no question about it in terms of, so what can you be doing?
Yeah.
How do leaders approach this all?
Look, let me chat about the jobs thing for a moment. And there is as many people on one side of that fence as there are on the other, saying yes they will and yes they won't. I think I'm on the same page as you, Greg. I think that in some ways AI is like many other massive technology leaps that mankind has gone through in the last 100+ years, right?
Yes.
Whether it's the typewriter or the invention of the internet, it was disruptive. And I think there's no escaping the fact that AI will disrupt and potentially replace jobs. I'm not necessarily referring to all the layoffs that are happening recently, because it's not for me to judge whether those were really attached to AI or not.
Yes.
But we can see how the trends around AI are impacting some simple examples around existing jobs. We can just see AI for the video production capabilities of AI is incredible. We talked earlier as we started this podcast about how you're using some tools to simplify your own job around the creation of podcasts, for example, call center agents, etc. I think it's inescapable. It's my hope personally that the new norm, once we are moved beyond some of this, is that it will create as much as it replaces, like it has in many trends massive technology trends over the last 100 or so plus years. I mean, if we just take, for example, the medical environment, I think we will see a world where AI might become better than the average human doctor at diagnosing an X-ray or an MRI.
Sure.
But that's okay, because I think the primary purpose of the doctor needs to be less about maybe identifying and more about curing. And it's the human element that I think that will bring. So, I think there's going to be job losses. I think there's going to be some changes in what it means to do a certain job. For example, if you're in the coding world, if you're a computer programmer, is some part of that going to be replaced by AI? Inevitably and undoubtedly. But will it completely replace it? No, I think there's always going to be a place for the complex or highly customized element of what needs to be done by a human. That will always be there. So I think that is part of it. But I did hear an interesting quote from someone once, and forgive me because I don't recall who it was, and they said, "You may not be replaced by AI, but you may be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI better than you." And I think that's perhaps the key here, which takes us to this topic of skills, right? And I sometimes have to give myself a bit of a kick under the butt as well, right? If we are not all understanding it and figuring out how to use it and incorporating it into your daily life in a way that's meaningful, then shame on us, because it is an excellent productivity tool. My wife is a teacher, and she uses AI to help her prepare for lessons. So why wouldn't you, right? It's incredible at slicing numbers. It's incredible at summarizing things. So there are absolutely lots of values to it. But if I bring it back to the African context, I think this is where open source potentially can play a role like it has in other elements of technology, and that's the accessibility to software. There are many elements of what is needed to either build or play with open source that are available free through what the world of open source is doing, even if that's a large language model, maybe it's a tool to train a model, etc. There are tons of open source variations or tools that can help people get access to software. And in our continent, that's not always possible. It's not always possible to be able to pay for it. The barrier to entry can be high in our world here in Africa. And I think that's a massive plus for some of the open source tools. Some of these tools don't necessarily require massive compute environments, because we don't have massive compute environments just readily lying around here in Africa for people to play on, right? So some of these
and now
tools
that we
will
have
use
electricity available for it.
Exactly. And there are other factors in Africa, right? I mean, I think that as a continent, if we're gonna really be a continent that plays in AI, I think each of us as a country is going to have to focus on beefing up our laws around data governance, because data is key here, right? Garbage in, garbage out has always been the mantra in the IT industry, and it's absolutely true. If you're going to train a model on junk, your model is junk, right? So I think we all have a responsibility to build strong data governance, not only in the companies we represent, but in the countries that we work in. But another thing that I don't think is yet caught up, and this is a global factor, but I see it being something that will continue to impact Africa unless we all figure out something to do here, is English is still the dominant language of AI. And that doesn't always play well with some countries in Africa. It could be a barrier for some who don't have command of the English language. And I think if we're really going to democratize AI, then we need to be able to have the ability to have AI interact, large language models, small language models in all of our languages. It's going to take time, but I hope we will get there in the end.
And just in terms of looking ahead, if we look to the future of AI, talking about quantum AI hybrids on the horizon, where do you see Red Hat's investing next to position Africa, or position software that you developed in Africa as a leading thing? I think one of the issues for me is that all this investment happening in AI around the globe, and I think Africa's got less than 1% of the overall investment in the last year. And that worries me. It worries me that all of this development is happening. There's more spent by the US and China in the last year on developing data centers than the entire infrastructure on the African continent. How do you see that? How do you see the future? And what sort of things do you see Red Hat doing to actually build that gap?
I think it's a great question. And look, I'm certainly not going to get into geopolitics here, but we
Sure.
are seeing geopolitical elements at play here that are to some degree polarizing the world. And you'd be right. We are seeing massive investment predominantly in the US and in China, but neither of those may be more or less palatable depending on which side of whatever you're on. And this introduces the whole concept of data sovereignty as well as something that's important for not just African countries and African companies to find their path through. It's a global phenomenon that to some degree, once again, is being accelerated through geopolitical elements. But it is important that every country and organization takes full responsibility for charting and controlling their digital path, their digital sovereignty, their digital control, so to speak. But I think, if I look at the G20 coming up now, I believe that where there are digital ministers, so to speak, I believe they will be meeting at the G20. And that may probably be the biggest, digital leadership gathering that Africa and the world might have seen for a while. I think our countries need to step up and lead here, but it isn't just going to be about governments doing this. I think organizations like Red Hat in the places where it exists need to be part of how we help to develop skills and how we make software available, how we train and upskill across the board, how we guide and be thought leaders to companies and institutions on concepts like incorporating AI into your normal application development way of thinking, and how to build a data sovereignty model that suits you as a company in the country that you operate, how to deal with this across different countries that you may be. There is a lot of work here, and I do think that we are in the infancy of this, but I think that we're all going to need to lead here, not just governments, but companies, thought leaders, organizations, etc. have all got to be a part of this. I would hate the world of AI to be dominated by one or maybe two large countries, or, even worse, one or two large companies that dominate the sphere.
Yes.
And so I think for me, that's an important element, is to democratize AI. And it can be done, right? Whatever OpenAI does or DeepSeek does, smaller organizations, smaller companies can build small language models. And by the way, I believe the future of business impact when it comes to AI is not necessarily going to hinge on what anybody does with a large language model. I believe the power is going to be in the small language model, the custom model, the proprietary years of data that any organization would have about themselves that will truly differentiate them because they have the data, and what they do with those small language models. I think that's where the value is, by the way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's much still to be happen on that front, and also scaling it to your requirements. Big, large language model not only requires massive amounts of infrastructure, energy, developers, all that sort of thing, learning. The smaller models can be quite effective if you scale it to your requirements rather than making much larger models that not necessarily what you require. So I think you spot on the money there in terms of where things are going to go. We're going to see lots of adaptations, and perhaps in the industry here in South Africa, there's some associations spring up where go, let's develop our own AI association that can build open source models for future development. Musk's, you spoke about it earlier with when he made, he literally made the Tesla model structure available or software available to others, right? Because he identified the fact that unless there was scale of electric vehicles in the world, it would remain too expensive. And the only way to bring down the expense of these things is to actually scale it. And that could be the model for AI in Africa. Let's share this and scale it by having lots more people being able to actually participate.
I agree with you, and I hope you're right, because I think part of this is also a question of return on investment. And I think we touched on it earlier, Greg. There is a lot of talk about the AI bubble at the moment. And I think that for me, that's largely a conversation about how the upfront investment that we're seeing in building and dominating the space around the large language model, clearly the investment right now is way outstripping what any of those organizations are able to produce in the form of profit or revenue even.
Yes.
But if you bring that question back to any medium-sized business here, how do they use AI in a way that's profitable? Forget what AI, what OpenAI is doing or Grok is doing or whatever. Right. How do you make it relevant? I saw a recent study done by MIT, and the sad thing is that the overwhelming feedback was that I think it was 95% plus projects around AI being done by commercial enterprises weren't profitable.
Yes.
Which is a bit of a shocking statistic, but it emphasizes the importance of some of the things we've already talked about, right? Well-defined projects, building the skills base that can make it successful, using open source to accelerate it and to be able to do it faster, and to reuse code that's already been done by others. Because I think right now that equation is perhaps still not where it needs to be. The profitability or the return on investment, even in initiatives that we are seeing in customers here in Africa and in South Africa, they are not all where they need to be in terms of having made a significant impact in terms of ROI. And there are some standout examples, but by and large, it would seem right now that equation doesn't have the right balance.
Dion, it's been a fabulous chat, and I think you and I could have probably gone on for a while longer on this one.
I think so, yes. Well, maybe we can come back and do round two, because it's a fascinating subject, and it's so pertinent to our day-to-day lives, not only in this IT space, but it impacts everybody, not just IT professionals.
Yes.
We're all touching on this in some degree, and it's something we're all wrestling with. So, it was a great discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you.
Dion, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Let's hook up for that other session at some point in time, and I look forward to chatting
I'd love to do
with
that.
you in the future.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.